Chapter 4. Psychology of Manipulation. Psychological manipulation is defined as a form of social influence, which seeks to alter the behavior and the perceptions of others by the use of tactics that are indirect, deceptive, and underhanded. In other words, it's about using certain tricks to get people to act in a certain way or to think certain things, usually to the advantage of whoever is perpetrating the manipulation. Now, from the very start, we need to make sure you understand that not all psychological manipulation and social influence is negative. It's possible to manipulate someone for their own good. For instance, parents may manipulate their children into eating vegetables. Inasmuch as that is manipulation, it ends up benefiting the child because his or her health is improved. Similarly, friends, family members, and healthcare professionals may try to influence you using certain manipulation techniques with the aim of getting you to make the right choices in certain situations. Social influence is a normal and important part of social discourse. In healthy social influence, there is no aspect of coercion. In other words, when a well-meaning person tries to influence you, and you resist that influence, they are not going to strong-arm you into doing what they want. However, in unhealthy psychological manipulation, the manipulator often resorts to coercive techniques if they sense that you are resistant to the softer techniques that they have been trying to use on you. When malicious people deploy psychological manipulation techniques against you, they usually try to conceal the aggressive nature of their intentions, so you have to understand that most of their techniques are designed to be subtle. Most of them will also take some time to get to know you and understand your psychological vulnerabilities before they can decide which manipulation techniques will work on you. This means that just because you have known someone for a while, and you haven't seen them try to harm you in any way, it doesn't guarantee the fact that their intentions are pure, which means that you shouldn't start disregarding your instincts about them. The best manipulators are those who reveal their intentions long after you have decided to trust them. Remember that manipulators generally have a tendency toward ruthlessness, so even if they are treating you well at the beginning of your association with them, pay close attention to the way they act towards others. If you see them using manipulation techniques against other people, you should know that it's just a matter of time before they get around to using the same techniques against you. It's important to understand these techniques and how they work so that you can be able to spot them when they are being used against you or someone close to you, and so that you can know how to defend against them. Gaslighting. Gaslighting is one of the most lethal psychological manipulation techniques out there. It's where a manipulator tries to get their target to start questioning their own reality. It involves getting someone to doubt their own memories and perceptions, and instead, to start believing what the manipulator wants them to believe. The manipulator will sow seeds of doubt in the person so that they start thinking that either they remember things wrong, or they are losing their sanity. Gaslighting involves the persistent denial of things that obvious facts. It also involves a lot of misdirection, contradictions, and blatant lying. When a person is subjected to gaslighting for a long time, they start to become unstable, and they start feeling as though their own beliefs are illegitimate. There are several techniques that gaslighters use to get a stranglehold on their victims. One such technique is withholding. This is where the manipulator refuses to listen to what the victim says or pretends not to understand what they are saying. You might bring up something important, but the response you get is, "I don't even remember this thing you keep talking about." Another gaslighting technique is called countering. This is where the manipulator questions the victim's memory of the events in question. They say things like, "Were you even sober? Because that is not how that happened." The manipulator would then go on to offer an entirely different version of the story, where he casts himself as the hero or even the real victim. Projection. Projection is a psychological manipulation technique where someone transfers their emotions and mistakes onto you. Projection is a defense mechanism that almost everyone uses to some extent. We all have a natural tendency to project our negative emotions and undesirable feelings onto the people around us, and this often happens when we feel like we have been put on the spot. However, inasmuch as we all do it, narcissists and people with other dark personality traits tend to do it excessively and to absurd extents. Toxic people find it very difficult to admit even to themselves that the nasty things around them could be a result of their own doing, and they always find people to blame for every little thing that happens. Such people often go out of their way to avoid taking responsibility for their own actions. As a result, they may assign their negative behavior and traits to you. For example, if you have a boss who is always late to work, you might be surprised to find him accusing you of tardiness even if you are consistently punctual. A kleptomaniac is more likely to accuse you of stealing his/her personal items. Isolation. We all have social support systems that help us cope with difficult situations and keep us from making decisions that are bad for us. We have friends and family members who take notice when our behavior changes, or when we start hanging out with bad people, and they always watch our backs. Manipulators understand this, and one of the first things that they'll do when trying to gain control over your life is to isolate you. Isolation facilitates abuse because it takes away any recourse that you might have when someone starts getting abusive. It closes a victim's avenues of escape, and it increases their sense of helplessness. It ensures that when things go south, there's no one there to rescue you. It increases the power that the abuser or manipulator has over the victim because it makes the victim more dependent on the abuser. Positive reinforcement. We always think of positive reinforcement as a good thing, but malicious people can also use it to manipulate their victims. The fact is that we all use positive reinforcement in one form or another. Parents use it to get their kids to behave properly, teachers use it to make their students more interested in school, bosses use it to encourage productivity, and partners use it to modify each other's behavior and relationships. It is an integral part of our social interactions, but it only becomes a problem when it's detrimental to the person it's being used on. Negative reinforcement. Negative reinforcement is a form of psychological manipulation which is used to make people feel obligated to act in certain ways in order to avoid certain levels of mental or physical pain or discomfort. In positive reinforcement, you get a reward for acting the way the manipulator wants you to act, and the desire for that reward is what modifies your behavior in the future. Negative reinforcement is, however, a bit more complicated than that. Punishment. In psychological manipulation, punishment is a negative action that is taken by the manipulator to weaken the victim's voluntary responses. Punishment works because it makes the victim fear the consequences of going against the will of the manipulator. We have already looked at how punishment differs from negative reinforcement, but we should point out that in some instances, those two can overlap. In this segment, we will take a look at some of the most common types of punishment that people with dark personality traits use to manipulate their victims. Nagging. Nagging, also known as pestering or hectoring, is a form of manipulation where one person continuously urges another to do something, despite the other person previously refusing to do it or to agree to do it at a later time. One author famously described nagging as an interaction where one person makes a repeated request while the other person repeatedly ignores that request, and both people become annoyed as the battle of wills escalates. Yelling. Yelling works as a manipulation technique for one simple reason: it makes you feel uncomfortable or afraid to the point that you comply with whatever the manipulator wants you to do. There are two main ways in which manipulators use yelling to manipulate others. People either yell to dominate over you, or to play the victim and to gain your sympathy. Silent treatment. The silent treatment works as a manipulation technique because it's a form of love withdrawal. When a person gives you the silent treatment, they are essentially saying, "I'm taking away the love unless you do what I want." It is a form of punishment that is designed to control people, and it's a very popular type of emotional abuse. Intimidation. Intimidation can either be covert or overt, but in either case, it's used by manipulators to get you to bend to their will out of fear. Overt intimidation is also known as bullying. This is where manipulators make open threats to get you to do what they want. They'll use fear to threaten you into submission. It may be a threat of physical violence. They'll brandish anger and rage to prove to you that they have violent tendencies. If you stand your ground, they may even resort to actual physical violence. They are usually angry people who have problems with authority. Traumatic one-trial learning. One-trial learning refers to singular experiences that we encounter, which end up shaping our behavior in the future. This sort of experience is usually traumatizing and powerful enough to serve as a deterrent from acting in a certain way for the rest of our lives. In many cases, one-trial learning may occur without anyone inducing it or imposing it on us. For example, if you try a certain kind of food for the first time, and then you get a serious bout of food poisoning, you may be traumatized to the point that you avoid eating that food again in the future. One-trial learning is important for humans and all animals because it's crucial for survival. When we were still hunters and foragers, one-trial learning would help us avoid foods that were poisonous or situations that were dangerous. Manipulation of facts. Manipulation of facts is one of the most effective psychological manipulation techniques because it is based on facts that are subject to interpretation. When a person manipulates facts, he is technically not lying. He is just using the facts in his favor. It could involve cherry-picking facts, omitting certain facts, or taking facts out of context. Even the most indisputable facts are subject to interpretation, and people with dark personality traits are very good at coming up with interpretations that portray them in the best possible light. Machiavellians are especially skilled at using factual information to turn bad things into seemingly good things. Chapter 5. Do we all have a dark side? Arc psychology really came to light in 2002, when Delroy Paulhus, a personality psychology researcher and professor of psychology at the University of British Columbia, and Kevin Williams, a research scientist with the Educational Testing Service, published their paper, The Dark Triad of Personality, Narcissism, Machiavellianism, and Psychopathy. In it the two laid out the personality traits for what they called the Dark Triad. These traits were narcissism, entitled self importance, Machiavellianism, the manipulation of others for one's own gains, and psychopathy, an antisocial individual completely lacking in empathy or remorse. Since that paper came out, thousands of other papers on the Dark Triad and dark psychology have appeared, with over 1,700 coming out in 2018 alone. And that's not counting the many thousands of articles, essays, opinion pieces, blogs, and websites devoted almost exclusively to the Dark Triad, that have also appeared in the past 10 years. What Paulhus and Williams laid out in that groundbreaking paper, in which they sampled 245 university students, was the idea that these three traits tend to exist along a spectrum not unlike Asperger's or autism, that the personalities of the Dark Triad move in and out of each other, even though they are otherwise distinct from one another, and rarely are all three present in one person, or rarely all three together to the extreme that that person would then qualify as having a mental disorder, and that all of us are at least a little bit narcissistic, a little bit Machiavellian, and a little bit psychopathic. These socially aversive traits have been around for centuries. And since Paulhus and Williams's paper came out, other researchers, particularly evolutionary biologists, have been questioning the Darwinian roots of these traits. Are these personality traits somehow biologically necessary to the reproduction of the species? Are they genetically rewarded? What is the value of these traits to the prolongation of humans? And on a grander scale, given that these three traits are so seemingly loathsome and undesirable, why are they a part of us? What did they contribute to the overall balance and harmony of nature, of human nature? How did they factor in biologically and evolutionarily, and why did they seem to survive and thrive? Not only in individuals but in societies. Did they preserve a balance between a civilized world and anarchy? Or are they leading us down the path to collective suicide? The dark side of genetics. As Lyle Watson put it in his book Dark Nature, A Natural History of Evil, Darwin, creator of the concept of survival of the fittest, viewed morality as humankind's cure for inner conflicts. He predicted that if any other species aside from our own, were to secure intellectual abilities that they would in time also develop a conscience, a set of morals. Watson agreed with Darwin's theory, and felt that whatever morals evolved in us, they would only become that much stronger alongside knowing what was immoral. Watson, though, trained as a botanist, zoologist, and ethologist, and, interestingly enough, originator of the hypothetical 100th monkey effect, and ever the reluctant Darwinian here in his study of evil and its utility, looks at evil from the biological perspective, and so defines evil as anything that upsets the integrity of an ecological environment, anything that discombobulates diversity, abundance, or communications. And while Watson the biologist can understand why almost every species, from a cellular level, feels compelled to kill off any stranger that comes into its midst and can appreciate infanticide among lions and birds, he is stumped, as are most of us, by the Pol Pots and the Ted Bundys of the world. His ultimate conclusion was rather desultory: the world is immoral though we are not. Natural selection is unavoidable, and devoid of any feeling. Genetic evolution, then, favors a kind of selfish behavior, on the individual level and on the bigger scale of humans as a species. As Watson puts it, it's okay and even necessary for our reproduction to be nice to people, but only to those in our bloodline. To those outside our bloodline, don't trust them, don't feel obligated to be nice to them. And lie, cheat, and steal whenever you can. Our genes require this sort of behavior if we are to survive. The happiness of everyone else be damned. Short-term success. In 2009, another seminal study in the field of the dark triad came out. In this one, the dark triad, facilitating a short-term mating strategy in men, psychologist Peter Jonassen and colleagues looked at the dark triad through the lens of evolution, asking whether or not these dark traits might give individuals an advantage in the world. In their introduction, they state, the reasons behind their paper have to do with their suspicion that dark triad traits don't just pop out of the blue within people, but they have a kind of evolutionary advantage. People seek out those with dark traits because those dark trait carriers have a greater chance to reproduce. Never mind that these dark traits tend to have dark results for individuals and society, they're beneficial in the long run. Psychopaths of the subclinical type tend not to be neurotic or anxietal, which gives these characters advantages when it comes to hooking up. Narcissists, too, who are largely out for themselves, and Machiavellians, who are experts at working other people, usually excel in one-night stands and short relationships. Anything long-term usually doesn't pan out, even though they tend to leave others damaged in their wake. What do these types care? They got what they wanted, and they don't want anything beyond their short-term needs. In other words, these dark personality alpha Joe types get ahead of everyone else at work, get laid more often, and with women who seem to attract, and seem most attracted to, the alpha males, and otherwise succeed in life. Again, as with Powell-Hiss and Williams's paper, this study not only gave the dark triad that much more credibility, but the media, especially the media covering the industries of business and finance, embraced it practically wholeheartedly. While plenty of folks lamented the findings and assertions put forth by Jonassen, decrying the idea that society tends to reward psychopaths and narcissists, many a ruthless CEO and more than a few pick-up artists felt both vindicated and emboldened. If the absence of anxiety and neuroticism led to bedding more women, whether or not all these notches on the bedpost led to more babies, i.e., whether or not it led to the genetic reproduction and continuation of that psychopaths, that narcissists, that Machiavellians' DNA, over and above the Joe Schmoes of the world vainly trying to woo women with roses and understanding and the old world values of a good, honest man, then it made just as much sense that having a narcissistic knack for self-aggrandizement and the charisma of a psychopath would give Manny Machiavelli a leg up in the hyper-competitive worlds of business and politics. The Dirty Dozen. Then, in 2010, Jonassen emerged again, this time with a 12-item questionnaire he and his colleague Gregory Webster of the University of Florida cynically named the Dirty Dozen. devised with the goal of providing other researchers with a cleaner, clearer and cheaper way to measure the latent constructs of the dark triad. The Dirty Dozen is a Cliff's Notes mashup of the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory and the Wonderlic Test, boiled down to 12 statements. The higher the score, the higher one's dark triad tendencies. Ruthless, counterproductive, toxic. 2 years later, in 2012, Ernest O'Boyle and colleagues at the School of Business and Economics at Longwood University in Virginia released the results of a meta-analysis of studies of the dark triad. Wanting to know what sorts of impact individuals with these dark traits were having in the workplace, they discovered that Machiavellians and psychopaths had a negative effect on the workplace and on coworkers, not a positive one. Job performance went down. A few years later, in an update on how things were going in the world of dark triad research since Paulus and Williams's groundbreaking paper, there'd been dozens of studies and over 350 scholarly citations. Adrian Furnham, a professor of psychology at University College London, along with Paulus himself and a fellow UC London psychology colleague, released The Dark Triad of Personality, a 10-year review. Almost anticlimactic in its principal finding, the three psychologists agreed that people of the dark triad stepped all over others in their desire to climb the corporate ladder. And while these types correlated positively with each other, each of the three dark triad traits was nevertheless unique. Machiavellians appear more likely to plagiarize essays and avoid risky bets. Narcissists are often more aggressive after any sort of threat to their ego. And psychopaths torment others and not only entertain more revenge fantasies but are more likely to follow through on them. Worse, the authors claimed that any one of these dark personality types made for horrible bosses, so bad that they were ultimately bad for business. What's bad may be good for business. But the tide against the dark triad soon began to shift. What was once regarded as malignant traits suddenly became useful, if not downright admirable. In the 2015 study, Do Bad Guys Get Ahead or Fall Behind? Relationships of the Dark Triad of Personality with Objective and Subjective Career Success, published by 3 Swiss psychologists, the authors decided that having these dark characters in the workplace maybe wasn't so bad after all. Narcissists made more money for themselves and, on occasion for their company. Machiavellians made for effective leaders and loved their jobs. Only the psychopaths seemed to have and create a hard time. In other words, score another one for the bad guys, who was quickly turning into not so bad guys, or bad guys who happened to be more successful than good guys. Narcissism seemed to correlate with higher salaries. Machiavellianism led individuals further up the career ladder, and psychopaths seemed to outnumber non-psychopaths in leadership positions. In the business world, these dark traits, this dark triad of dark psychology, the more people seem to study it, the more people seem to admire it and embrace it. And not grudgingly but as traits to aspire to. As practicing clinical psychologist Noam Spancer put it in a 2017 story for Psychology Today. Echoing the cynicism of Lyle Watson, the world, especially the business world, can be a mean place. Better to be mean back to it, and to the other mean people out there. And if that means mirroring the behaviors of those in the dark triad, so be it. Still, as much as he praised the qualities of these dark personality types, he did allow for all the trouble they cause. Lying, cheating, bullying. Chapter 6. Understanding Dark Triad Personalities. ARC psychology is not a single, universally applicable medical diagnosis that can be applied across all cases of deviant personalities. There are, in fact, a wide variety of ways that dark psychology may manifest itself in someone's psychological and behavioral makeup. There is no absolute division of one deviant personality type from another, and many deviant personalities with prominent features of dark psychology may display elements of more than one manifestation of dark psychology. This chapter will explore 3 types of dark psychology personalities. It is important to remember that although the internet has spawned a huge growth in problems resulting from dark psychology, these traits have been part of human culture since ancient times. In fact, one of the dark psychology profiles we will explore in this chapter, Machiavellianism, takes its name from a medieval politician. Another, narcissism, takes its name from an ancient mythological character. Together, the three dark psychology profiles, psychopathy, Machiavellianism, and narcissism, make up what is known as the dark triad. Psychopathy. Psychopathy is defined as a mental disorder with several identifying characteristics that include antisocial behavior, amorality, and inability to develop empathy or to establish meaningful personal relationships, extreme egocentricity, and recidivism, with repeated violations resulting from an apparent inability to learn from the consequences of earlier transgressions. Antisocial behavior, in turn, is defined as behavior based upon a goal of violating formal and informal rules of social conduct through criminal activity or through acts of personal, private protest, or opposition, all of which is directed against other individuals or society in general. Egocentricity is the behavior when the offending person sees himself or herself as the central focus of the world, or at least of all dominant social and political activity. Empathy is the ability to view and understand events, thoughts, emotions, and beliefs from the perspective of others, and is considered one of the most important psychological components for establishing successful, ongoing relationships. Amorality is entirely different from immorality. An immoral act is an act which violates established moral codes. A person who is immoral can be confronted with his or her actions with the expectation that he or she will recognize that his or her actions are offensive form immoral, if not illegal. Standpoint. Amorality, on the other hand, represents a psychology that does not recognize that any moral codes exist, or if they do, that they have no value in determining whether or not to act in one way or another. Thus, someone displaying psychopathy may commit horrendous acts that cause tremendous psychological and physical trauma and not ever understand that what he or she has done is wrong. Worse still, those who display signs of psychopathy usually worsen over time because they are unable to make the connection between the problems in their lives and in the lives of those in the world around them and their own harmful and destructive actions. Machiavellianism. Strictly defined, Machiavellianism is the political philosophy of Niccolò Machiavelli, who lived from 1469 until 1527 in Italy. In contemporary society, Machiavellianism is a term used to describe the popular understanding of people who are perceived as displaying very high political or professional ambitions. In psychology, however, the Machiavellianism scale is used to measure the degree to which people with deviant personalities display manipulative behavior. Machiavelli wrote The Prince, a political treatise in which he stated that sincerity, honesty, and other virtues were certainly admirable qualities, but that in politics, the capacity to engage in deceit, treachery, and other forms of criminal behavior was acceptable if there were no other means of achieving political aims to protect one's interests. Popular misconceptions reduce this entire philosophy to the view that the end justifies the means. To be fair, Machiavelli himself insisted that the more important part of this equation was ensuring that the end itself must first be justified. Furthermore, it is better to achieve such ends using means devoid of treachery whenever possible because there is less risk to the interests of the actor. Thus, seeking the most effective means of achieving a political end may not necessarily lead to the most treacherous. In addition, not all political ends that have been justified as worth pursuing must be pursued. In many cases, the mere threat that a certain course of action may be pursued may be enough to achieve that end. In some cases, the treachery may be as mild as making a credible threat to take action that is not really even intended. In contemporary society, many people overlook the fact that Machiavellianism is part of the dark triad of dark psychology and tacitly approve of the deviant behavior of political and business leaders who are able to amass great power or wealth. However, as a psychological disorder, Machiavellianism is entirely different from a chosen path to political power. The person displaying Machiavellian personality traits does not consider whether his or her actions are the most effective means to achieving his or her goals, whether there are alternatives that do not involve deceit or treachery, or even whether the ultimate result of his or her actions is worth achieving. The Machiavellian personality is not evidence of a strategic or calculating mind attempting to achieve a worthwhile objective in a contentious environment. Instead, it is always on, whether the situation calls for a cold, calculating, and manipulative approach or not. For example, we had all called in sick to work when we really just wanted a day off. But for most of us, such conduct is not how we behave normally. And after such acts of dishonesty, many of us feel guilty. Those who display a high degree of Machiavellianism would not just lie when they want a day off, they see lying and dishonesty as the only way to conduct themselves in all situations, regardless of whether doing so results in any benefit. What's more, because of the degree of social acceptance and tacit approval granted to Machiavellian personalities who successfully attain political power, their presence in society does not receive the kind of negative attention accorded to the other two members of the dark triad. Psychopathy and narcissism. Narcissism. The term, narcissism, originates from an ancient Greek myth about Narcissus, a young man who saw his reflection in a pool of water and fell in love with the image of himself. In clinical psychology, narcissism is an illness was introduced by Sigmund Freud and has continually been included in official diagnostic manuals as a description of a specific type of psychiatric personality disorder. In psychology, narcissism is defined as a condition characterized by an exaggerated sense of importance, an excessive need for attention, a lack of empathy, and, as a result, dysfunctional relationships. Commonly, narcissists may outwardly display an extremely high level of confidence, but this facade usually hides a very fragile ego and a high degree of sensitivity to criticism. There is often a large gulf between a narcissist's highly favorable view of himself or herself, the resulting expectation that others should extend to him or her favors and special treatment, and the disappointment when the results are quite negative or otherwise different. These problems can affect all areas of the narcissist's life, including personal relationships, professional relationships, and financial matters. As part of the dark triad, those who exhibit traits resulting from narcissistic personality disorder (NPD) may engage in relationships characterized by a lack of empathy. For example, a narcissist may demand constant comments, attention, and admiration from his or her partner, but will often appear unable or unwilling to reciprocate by displaying concern or responding to the concerns, thoughts, and feelings of his or her partner. Narcissists also display a sense of entitlement and expect excessive reward and recognition, but usually without ever having accomplished or achieved anything that would justify such feelings. There is also a tendency toward excessive criticism of those around him or her, combined with heightened sensitivity when even the slightest amount of criticism is directed at him or her. Thus, while narcissism in popular culture is often used as a pejorative term and an insult aimed at people like actors, models, and other celebrities who display high degrees of self-love and satisfaction, NPD is actually a psychological term that is quite distinct from merely having high self-esteem. The key to understanding this aspect of dark psychology is that the narcissist's image of himself or herself is often completely and entirely idealized, grandiose, and inflated and cannot be justified with any factual meaningful accomplishments or capacities that may make such claims believable. As a result of this discord between expectation and reality, the demanding, manipulative, inconsiderate, self-centered, and arrogant behavior of the narcissist can cause problems not only for himself or herself, but for all of the people in his or her life. The real world is a lot messier. Many of us have grown accustomed to so-called toxic relationships, whether they are relationships with our partners, our coworkers, our family members, our bosses, or our political and community leaders. Chapter 7. 15 different types of personality. Introvert, self-sufficient, quiet, and reserved. Their energy is drained by them socializing, so they tend to be comfortable when they are alone. They process their thoughts internally. They need time to be alone for them to recharge. Sensing. They are aware of, trust facts, details, specifics, present realities, and past experiences. ISTJs are often pragmatic, observant, and realistic. They live in the now and here. Judging. They are disciplined, organized, and strategic. ISTJs are very responsible, and they stick to the schedules. They like to prepare and plan ahead. Intuitive, introspective, imaginative, and creative. They are perfect at analyzing complex topics. They mainly focus on the future rather than the present. They trust their gut instincts. Extrovert. These kinds of people like to be around people. They have high energy levels and are very active. ENFJs like to take up the initiative. They are enthusiastic and outgoing. They tend to talk more than listen. Perceiving. Keeping options open, preferring spontaneity, and flexibility. ISTPs are very adaptive, and they go with the flow. They are playful and are less aware of the time. They prefer to begin a project, and they question the need for many rules. 1. ISTJ personality, the inspector. At your first impression, ISTJs are so intimidating. ISTJs are seen as formal, proper, and serious. ISTJs like old-school traits and traditions that uphold cultural responsibility, honor, patience, and hard work. ISTJs are upright, calm, and quiet. 2. INFJ personality, the counselor. These are idealists and visionaries who produce brilliant ideas and creative imaginations. INFJs have a totally different and very profound aspect of viewing the universe. Counselors tend to have a depth and substance in the manner they think. They never take anything at a surface level or accept things the way they are. Many people may perceive this kind of person as weird because they view life differently. 3. INTJ personality, the mastermind. People in this personality type, as introverts, are reserved, comfortable, and Quiet when they are alone. INTJs are normally self-sufficient, and they would prefer to work alone than in a group. INTJs live in a world full of strategy, analysis, and ideas. 4. ENFJ personality, the giver. These are focused on people. ENFJs are charismatic, outspoken, idealistic, extroverted, ethical, and highly principled, and they understand how to connect and interact with other people no matter their personality or background. They really rely on their feelings and intuition. They live a life full of imagination rather than in the actual world. Instead of the ENFJs concentrating on living in the now and what is happening currently, they tend to focus on the abstract and what could happen in the future possibly. 5. ISTP personality, the craftsman. These are very mysterious people who are normally logical and quite rational, but they are also enthusiastic and spontaneous. ISTPs often have the capability of humorously insightful observations about the universe around them. ISTPs' traits are less easy to recognize than other personality types, even for those who know the traits very well cannot often anticipate their reactions. 6. ESFJ personality, the provider. A person with this type of personality is a stereotypical extrovert. ESFJs are like social butterflies. Their urge to socialize with people and make them happy often ends up making the ESFJs very popular. ESFJs tend to be sports hero or cheerleaders in college or high school. This is a very common type of personality and one that is loved by many people. 7. INFP personality, the idealist. INFPs are quite reserved. INFPs prefer not to speak about themselves, particularly in their first interaction with a new person. INFPs love spending most of their time to be alone in a very quiet environment where they can make sense of what is going on around them. People with this kind of personality types like analyzing symbols and signs. 8. ESFP personality, the performer. Performers have an observant, perceiving, feeling, and extroverted personality trait, and they are often seen as good entertainers. They are born to be in front of other people and to capture the stage. This type loves the spotlight. They are persons with very strong interpersonal techniques. ESFPs are fun and lively, and they enjoy being the epitome of attention. 9. ENFP personality, the champion. The champions have an intuitive, perceiving, feeling, and an extroverted personality. ENFPs are highly individualistic, and they tend to drive towards building their own habits, looks, ideas, actions, and methods. Champions don't love cookie-cutter individuals and hate when they are forced to live in a tiny box. 10. ESTP personality, the doer. The doers are ruled by the need for emotions, social engagements and feelings, reasoning, and logical processing, along with a need for total freedom. Abstracts and theories do not keep them quite interested for a long time. People having this kind of personality type tend to leap before they look, mending their shortcomings as they go through, rather than preparing contingency plans or sitting idle. 11. ENTJ personality, the commander. Their main purpose of life concentrates on external areas, and all their issues are dealt with logically and rationally. Their secondary purpose of the operation is more internal, where reasoning and intuition take center stage. They are naturally born leaders, and they like to be in charge. 12. INTP personality, the thinker. Thinkers are known in your society and in daily life, their excellent theories and unrelenting logic that makes sense, since INTPs are arguably the most logical mind of all personality types. INTPs love patterns, and they have a very keen eye for picking up on discrepancies, and a perfect capability to analyze people, making it not a good idea to lie to an INTP-type person. 13. ISFJ personality, the nurturer. The nurturers are philanthropists. They are often ready to give back and return generosity with more generosity. They are kind-hearted and warm. Nurturers have value for cooperation and peace and are likely to be more sensitive when it comes to other people's emotions and feelings. Many people have great value of the ISFJ personality type for their awareness and consideration and their capability to bring out the best in other people. 14. ENTP personality, the visionary. This is one of the rarest personality types in the universe. This is understandable. Even though the visionaries are extroverts, ENTPs do not enjoy small talk, and they may not be successful in social interaction, particularly those that may involve people who are very different from the ENTP type. Visionaries are very knowledgeable and intelligent. 15. ISFP personality, the composer. The composers are introverts, but they do not seem like introverts. This is so because when they have challenges in connecting to others at first, they try to become friendly, approachable, and warm at the end. ISFPs are fun to be in your company and quite spontaneous, which makes them the appropriate pal to be within any activity, regardless of the activity is planned for or not. A Chapter 8. Manipulations, Tactics and Schemes. Number of us don't even realize they're attempting to regulate and puzzle us. We might have an anxious feeling in our intestine that doesn't match the manipulator's words or feel entrapped right into agreeing with a request. Most individuals respond in the manner in which escalates misuse or play into the hands of the abuser, which can make us feel little and also guilty, yet then resort as well as permit unacceptable actions. If you had a manipulative mom and dad, it could be tougher to acknowledge in a partner, because it knows. Old knowledge to recognize your enemy is essential when handling a manipulator. Having the ability to detect these hidden arrows allows you to respond strategically to covert manipulation. Comprehending what they depend on equips you. When people act passive-aggressively, what shows up passive or defensive is concealed hostility. It's debatable to what level their actions are conscious or unconscious. To the sufferer, it does not matter. The impact is the same. Being excessively understanding places you in jeopardy of being abused repeatedly. When somebody strikes you overtly or secretly, they're aggressive. Goals of a manipulator. The purpose of the adjustment is to obtain influence, to obtain our requirements fulfilled. Yet, chronic manipulators do so for power as well as control and also use deceptive and abusive methods. Manipulators preserve dominance via continuous, reoccurring emotional control, misuse, and even coercive control. Often, they're passive-aggressive. They might lie or act caring or hurt or shocked by your problems, all to disperse any type of criticism and also to remain to work unacceptably. In maintaining control to do what they wish, manipulators' purpose. 1. To stay clear of being challenged. 2. To place you on the defensive. 3. To make you doubt yourself and also your assumptions. 4. To conceal their hostile intent. 5. 2. Stay clear of responsibility. 6. To not need to transform. Ultimately, you are taken advantage of and can shed reliance on your own, as well as your sensations and perceptions. Gaslighting is a treacherous, disabling kind of manipulation. Emotional tactics of adjustment. Psychological strategies of control. Exactly how do you get what you want? Take a minute to think about a new circumstance in which you desired something from one more individual. Maybe you wanted your companion to clean up the meals. Or you wanted a promotion from your employer. Or, you desired an individual at an event to take place a day with you. Just how did you get it? In a perfect globe, we can just request for all of the essential things we desire from people, and they would comply. Yet the world is not best, and we can't get whatever that we want on a first shot. So, what can you do to get what you want? There is a lot of honest, moral response to this question. Yet there are also unethical solutions. If you try to obtain what you want via deceptiveness, lies, or indirect methods, you are utilizing manipulation. Individuals are trying to control others every day. If you can identify the indications of control, you can see through them and also have more control over the decisions you make as well as your connection with others. Techniques of manipulation. Appeal. All of us recognize someone that utilizes a wink and a compliment to obtain what they want. People wish to feel appealing and also desired. Manipulators play into these sensations by being enchanting. They believe that when an individual starts to get a little flirty, they'll begin to be drawn into the manipulator as well as will certainly be more likely to submit to the manipulator's needs. Coercion. This method isn't all enjoyable and also flirty. When a person is coercing another to do something, they might be making use of anxiety of harm or dangers. Silent treatment. Silence is a remarkably efficient control and arrangement device. Silence makes us anxious. If a person is silent or declining to talk, we might feel the need to give in to their wishes or give them something they want simply to damage the silence. Reason. Not all control strategies are underhanded. However, they might be used unethically. The factor is a beautiful instance of such a control technique. Individuals may make use of factors or logical arguments to obtain what they want. They might inform an individual or themselves something like, if you help me burglarize this bank, you will certainly be able to feed your family members. Nothing incorrect concerning that, right? But when it's difficult to argue against somebody who utilizes factor as a manipulation technique, you might be more likely to break down and offer the manipulator what they desire. Regression. When two individuals factor with each other like grown-ups, it can be straightforward for both events to hold their ground. Yet when one person reverts to acting like a child, things might go haywire. This is the regression tactic. A person may yawp, weep, or pout until they get their means. People may give up simply since they desire the childish behavior to stop. Self-abasement. Not all manipulation tactics entail insulting or compelling the various other people to do something. If a manipulator makes use of self-abasement to get what they want, they will humble themselves. Self-abasement might be utilized when a manipulator desires a person to forgive them, believe them, or make various other initiatives to reinforce a connection. Duty conjuration. Allows claim you are thinking about obtaining your nails done. It's simple. Just to choose, no, I'm not going to get my nails done. If you currently scheduled an appointment, nevertheless, it's not so simple to just flee and not obtain your nails done. Duty conjuration uses these types of responsibilities to encourage someone to follow through with strategies. A manipulator might state, "Yet you promised," or, "I have currently reserved the appointments," to make saying no a lot harder. Hardball. Hardball methods take browbeating to the following degree. While someone might make use of a threat to set up the concern of injury, hardball strategies trigger damage or bodily injury. Pleasure induction. For several, enjoyment induction is a simple control strategy. When someone conjures up the satisfaction induction method, they are merely telling an individual that the action will be fun, which the person will enjoy. Come on, it will be enjoyable. Social comparison. The social comparison theory describes precisely how we contrast ourselves with others. Many people measure their success, appearance, and also the presence of personality traits with the comparison of others. Manipulators know this propensity well. They might make use of social contrast to persuade individuals to act. Your good friend at the office does this for her partner. The star in the publication in on X diet regimen, you must be as well. Monetary reward. Manipulators might play into an individual's greed by using the cash to devote acts that they generally would not dedicate. If you were offered $1,000,000, would certainly you commit a crime? What are master manipulators? Allows break down some stereotypes right here. Ladies are usually mounted as master manipulators. This simply isn't real. There are no sex distinctions in methods of manipulation. Research study reveals that men and women similarly carry out these strategies. Simply view any kind of pickup musician, work his magic on YouTube, and the misconceptions of ladies being manipulators will undoubtedly go away before your eyes. Correctly, how do tactics of manipulation show up in the Big Five? Manipulation tactics appear regularly in The Royal Prince. Machiavelli is just one of the world's most popular manipulators. He is so notorious that one of the dark triad characteristics is named after him. Individuals that are a lot more Machiavellian are most likely to utilize as well as warrant their use adjustment tactics. They believe that they are above ethics and also deserve to obtain what they want, even if they get it via adjustment. This connection is instead apparent, but there are also some links between methods of manipulation and also the huge 5 characteristics. Let's take a look at them. If you would love to see what your character ratings are, you can take my free character quiz. Nonetheless, it doesn't factor these strategies of adjustment into your results. Extraversion. People who usually score high are more likely to use browbeating as well as responsibility conjuration. Agreeableness. Individuals that rack up high in agreeableness are more likely to make use of satisfaction induction and reason to obtain what they desire. These two adjustment strategies are some of the most moral. They encourage people that they will get something positive out of taking specific actions. On the other hand, more unpleasant people are more likely to look for retribution on individuals with browbeating and the cold shoulder. Conscientiousness. Comparable to agreeableness, people that score high on conscientiousness are most likely to pick reason over other control methods. People who score low in conscientiousness are more likely to choose possibly criminal strategies, like a threat or unlawful type of financial incentive. Openness. People who rack up high for openness are more likely to utilize factors and also sometimes satisfaction induction or obligation invocation. Practical. Reasoning frequently needs a greater understanding of thinking or more excellent knowledge. High openness and even high intellect are typically linked. Alternatively, people who score low in openness are most likely to make use of social comparison. As you review partnerships in your life, watch out for master manipulators and also indications of the complying with manipulation techniques. The more you learn about manipulation, the simpler it will certainly be to see these techniques at work as well as get even more control over the decisions you make. Chapter 9. Recognize manipulative behaviors. How that we fully understand deception in the aspect of mind control and dark psychology. Let us narrow the study further and take on the second example of mind control, manipulation. We shall be turning manipulation inside out to understand what exactly it is, and where possible, provide real-life examples. When a doctor persuades a client into changing their lifestyle to overcome health issues such as obesity, we can refer to this as social influence. This is a harmless type of influence. The same applies to all other forms of power, whereby the person doing the influencing has good intentions of the receptor at heart. On the contrary, if a person uses a form of coercion to get their way and benefit from the receptor's action or reaction, this is considered to be a harmful influence and will generally add up to manipulation. If you analyzed all forms of mind control, you would realize that a manipulator can use most of them to gain the influence they desperately need. One of the most common tactics across the 5 types of mind control is known as emotional blackmail. Here, a manipulator comes up with a plan to evoke guilt or sympathy in their victim. They understand all too well that guilt and pity are one of the strongest human emotions and are likely to open up their targets to their manipulation. Once the guard is dropped, the manipulator takes advantage of the subject and initiates the coercion process. In no time, the question of manipulation finds themselves cooperating and assisting the controller in attaining their malicious goals. Emotional blackmail is one of many tactics employed by manipulative people. There are others, such as a covert form of abuse known as crazy making. Just like the name suggests, the aim of the manipulator is to make their subject to feel crazy. They create a scenario where the victim develops self-doubt. At times, the level of self-doubt might be so severe that the matter might think they are losing their mind. There is yet another form of manipulation where the manipulator acts as if to support their victim verbally but give non-verbal cues that portray contradicting meaning. If they get confronted, they revert to rationalization, justification, deception, and denial to try and escape from trouble. Another big problem with manipulators is that they might not always be aware of what their subjects need. At times, they might be mindful of them, but lack the ability to consider and provide them. This does not, at all, justify their behavior. What it does is show that a manipulator will neither consider nor prioritize these needs. They also do not feel any pity, guilt, or shame. The dangerous thing about this trait is that it makes it hard for the manipulator to stop their harmful influence. If this is a point to consider, it explains why some victims of this vice never realize the extent of the damage until it is too late. Manipulators are also solitary humans. They are most likely to be found alone because they never form or sustain long-lasting relationships. The problem is that after building relationships of any form, their manipulative nature creeps in and scares their friends or lovers away. People who at some point relate with manipulators confess to feeling used and lacking trust towards the controllers. In this case, the problem affects both parties. First, the controller will not be able to recognize or provide the needs of the other party. On the other hand, the affected person will not succeed in creating the emotional connection required to sustain the relations. In the end, both parties go their own way, and the manipulator is once again left lonely. The qualities of a manipulative person. According to George Simon, a psychology writer, there are distinct qualities that define a manipulative person. If someone possesses these traits, their chances of being successful manipulators are extremely high. In the same way, if one lacks these traits, they cannot use other people to get to their selfish goals. I bet this is one of those qualifications we all do not want. In Simon's words, a successful manipulator must have the ability to hide their aggressive nature and intentions from the public, and more so their potential targets. Have the ability to identify the vulnerable aspects of their potential victims so as to decide which approaches to use for efficient manipulation. Have an extraordinary level of ruthlessness in them to enable them to overcome the qualms that might arise from the harm they cause on their subjects. Ruthlessness can be emotional or physical. The behaviors of manipulative people. We already know the traits that define a manipulative person. These are the requirements that one needs to possess before they can be potential manipulators. There are also traits that define a manipulator during the process of manipulation. In short, what are the behaviors that these people portray and use to actualize the process of manipulation? Reinforcing. In psychology, reinforcement is a stimulus, positive or negative, that increases or strengthens the probability of a specific outcome. When we talk of positive reinforcement, it is a tactic that a manipulator will use in public so as to pick their subjects. The manipulator will fake some moves, such as loud laughter, random smiles, giving gifts, crocodile tears, excess apologies, exaggerated praise and temporary charm, to mention but a few. Positive reinforcement places the manipulator above random strangers and draws attention. The point of fraudulent behavior is to make people want to befriend them. To be honest, if a person offers us a gift or starts a friendly chat, our minds immediately soften, and we want to return the favor. If we find an innocent-looking lady crying by herself at the park, we genuinely want to know how we can help. Unbeknownst to us, some of these people are out there hunting. In negative reinforcement, the manipulator will offer to rescue the victim out of a harmful situation if they agree to do something in return. For example, a teacher might provide to grant a student pass grades after they have failed if the student offers sex in return. This is a tricky situation, because the victim is usually in a fix and at times, the offer by the manipulator might be their only way out. Rationalizing. Rationalization is the act of making up excuses to make one appear innocent. Even if a manipulator were caught red-handed in the act of negatively influencing others, they would not accept it. Instead, they would come up with convincing reasons as to why they committed the act. In most cases, they claim to have been trying to help the victims. Punishing. Punishing, in this case, is not necessarily the use of a cane to flog someone. It is a method of control where the manipulator will deploy a set of behaviors to influence the psychology of a victim. Some of these punishment tactics include silent treatment, playing the victim, nagging, yelling, crying, threatening, and sulking, among others. The aim of the action is to make the victim feel guilty of something they might not have done. If the victim plays along, they start apologizing, throwing them deep into the manipulator's trap. Minimizing. Minimization is a combination of denial and rationalization. If caught, they defend themselves by stating that their behavior is not as harmful as it appears. We have all met people who throw bad-tasting jokes at us, only to claim that they were mere jokes and should be taken lightly. Explosiveness. Explosive behavior, also known as traumatic one-trial learning, is the act where the manipulator will throw tantrums at the slightest provocation. The sudden reactions, which might include verbal abuse and explosive anger, are meant to discourage the subject from upsetting, confronting, or contradicting the oppressor. Beneath the skin, the manipulator is playing a game of dominance, intimidation, and superiority over the victim. Diverting issues. When a manipulator is asked a question, especially one that relates to their conduct, they are excellent at diverting the items. Instead of giving real or straight-to-the-point answers, they give confusing responses. Their aim is to try and distract the question, especially if it might expose their negative behavior. In most cases, they will respond vaguely, then come up with a diversion tactic such as introducing another topic, asking a question of their own, or exploding. Lying. Manipulators are masters at telling lies. Because their intentions and actions are generally unpleasant, they know that by being honest, nobody would fall for them. As such, they come up with lies. The lies that they fabricate are so accurate that it is usually impossible to tell when they are false or not. While the truth might ultimately come out, it will often be too late for the victim to respond. A manipulator will use any form of lies to convince their subjects and get their way. Intimidation. A manipulator likes to keep their victims on the defensive or in fear. They pile threats and blames on the victim so that it appears like the victim is at their mercy. Anytime the victim tries to get away from them, they are threatened, forcing them to obey the manipulator. You have heard of relationships where either of the lovers threatens to leak indecent photos of their partner if they tried to walk out or report them. This is a common form of intimidation that is aided by the extensive use of the internet. Lying by omission. Omission lying, or propaganda, is closely related to lying, only that in the latter, everything the manipulator says is a lie. In omission lying, though, the controller will tell a truthful subject but omit important issues that needed to be highlighted. This is a form of manipulation that affects many parents today. A good example is when a child requests for money to buy some treats but end up buying drugs with the money. In this case, the child told the truth about needing money to buy treats, while in reality, the treats were drugs. In short, if the parent knew the real intent of the child, they would not have given them the money. Denial. The whole life of a manipulator is lived in denial. They never see things for what they are, because if they did, it would have to start with the bitter fact that their lives are messy. One of the reasons that a person will be okay with invading others' lives and destroying them is because they hate theirs. Another behavior that is common with manipulators is that any time a manipulator is accused of anything, they will refuse to take responsibility, regardless of whether there is evidence or not. In fact, they will reverse the blame and place it on the subject. Playing the victim. The final behavior we will discuss, which is common in manipulators, is playing the victim. No matter how ruthless these people can get, they always make the world think they are oppressed, despite being the oppressors. This method usually works in their favor because when they appear hurt, they easily evoke feelings of pity, sympathy, and compassion. The majority of people in the world are willing to help others who are suffering, and manipulators are fond of exploiting such people and using them to further their plans. Chapter 10. Principle of persuasion. Persuasion is the ability that people have to transmit ideas and that they are disseminated by those who act as recipients of them. This translates more effectively as the ability that human beings have, through a relationship, to convince others. Persuasion is a tool that can be used in fields such as marketing, advertising, and commerce, basically sectors of the economy in which the public is sensitive to various interactions with environmental media and where the decision is the objective of who persuade. Let us elaborate a scene in which a seller wants his products to be acquired by the buyers. These, besides being useful, must be attractive and in one way or another, more desirable than that of the competition. This is achieved with persuasion, the which attracts customers by offering the best attributes of the product or service, in an effective way, providing comfort to the buyer. by relating the most promotional aspects to the most personal. Persuasion, in turn, generates competition and demand in the market, generating dynamism of intentions and offers that fosters the development of sustainable economies. Another use of persuasion that we see in a society constantly is in the application of the law. In a trial, the lawyers, in addition to using the law as the main tool, use the elements in their favor and persuade the jury and the judge that they are valid to win the case.